Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Marcos and Kees. So this is the part where we speak about changing finance, systemic changing finance from the advocacy perspective, from the social and political perspective. And before we move on into the topic, I wanted just to briefly introduce our guests, because you might not know him. Marcos is very well known in Spain and in Catalonia and now in the world, because he is the executive director of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And he's also professor in business administration. He defines himself as an entrepreneur, and I know that from my own experience. He has been founding partner of Inmark and SingularNet, amongst others, and it's a pleasure to have him with us today. And we have quite a different profile with Kees Vendrik. He has spent most or a large part of his career in politics. He, with the Green Left Party in the Netherlands, in different positions, amongst other as a member of parliament. He's also been in the board of the Court of Audit of the Netherlands from 2011 to 2017, when he decided to join Triodos Bank as our chief economist. And I love a sentence that I think is his own, when he says that he continues his commitment in the world of private money with a public heart. I think that's beautiful. So we're going to start our conversation with them, and then we're going to have the opportunity to ask questions also with Miquel García Prieto on stage. And I'd like to first introduce the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, because you might know it, you might not be familiar with it. So Marcos, could you maybe give us the elevator pitch for the Global Alliance?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. Molt bona tarda a tothom, gràcies per ser aquí. Després podrem parlar en català, castellà o anglès, és igual. But I'll go back into English, sorry. That's the guideline. So, well, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values is a network, a movement. We prefer to call it a movement of banks. It was founded in 2009. Triodos Bank was one of the co-founders. Today, we are 54 banks all over the world. Banks in Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific, North America, and Europe. And our main purpose is to become a role model for other banks, for policymakers and regulators to contribute to a positive change in the world of finance. So that's basically, and in the essence, what we are for. Mm-hmm.
Great. So once that's clear for everyone, we all know Triodos Bank, we all know the Global Alliance now. Kees, what is the role of Triodos Bank in changing finance? Why Triodos Bank has a place there, and why now?
Well, let me first say, Sandra, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here and meeting the Triodos community in Spain. So thank you very much for that in advance. I think we as Triodos are in the business of financing change for decades. And it's our long experience that if we want to create more impact in society, if we want to create more consciousness about the role of money in modern society, we should enhance our operations, so to say. We should broaden our agenda, and we should take a look into the financial system itself. And that's not only the experience of Triodos itself. Today we memorize, celebrate the financial crisis which took off 10 years ago. And that was a financial crisis of a financial system that didn't serve the communities, that didn't serve the real economy, but was detached from what money should be about, bringing positive change. Instead, the money system created disaster, created unrest, created unemployment, created poverty. So for everybody then it became very clear that the financial system was on the wrong track, and that started decades ago. So it's a task for everybody, even for, and also for Triodos, to putting the financial system back on track and to remember what it was originally designed for, to serve the people and the community and the real economy. And that's a struggle we are in the midst of. My impression is we learned a few lessons from the financial crisis. That's visible in Brussels, that's visible throughout Europe, but we are not there yet. And I think the very most important challenge today is 3 years ago, the world community has agreed on the Paris Agreement on climate change. And in the same year, the world community has adopted 17 sustainable development goals. And I think that's a big step forward because it sets a roadmap for the next decade. And that's the tasks we all have as a present generation. What kind of world do we want to give to our children and their children? And we have to act right now. And we need another financial system to meet these targets. And we are in a hurry. We want to speed up, especially on the issue of climate change. There's not much time left. We all know that for many years, and still governments are struggling. But the positive thing is there is one sustainable development goal, and that's SDG number 17. And SDG number 17, it's the last one, specifically calls upon all communities, business, finance, and citizens to work together with governments to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, that's close, very close to the mission of Triodos. So financing change must mean that we have to change the financial system in order to meet an agenda the whole community of the world has agreed upon.
Could you maybe share with us a couple of examples that you've experienced within Triodos in which we've influenced and we've taken steps towards this changing finance that you're talking about? What have we done? Or what are we doing now?
Now, what is a good example is what happened earlier this year in the European community, in the European Union, is that all regulation in Europe of the financial industry is more or less dominated by decision-making in Brussels. And if a decision is reached in Brussels on what kind of financial regulation, it should be adopted in the member states and being executed. And this year, there was a discussion between the European Commission, European Parliament and member states on capital. And one of the reasons why the financial crisis caused so much economic damage is that major banks in Europe, especially in the northern countries, had almost no capital available. So they didn't have the resources to clean up their own mess when the crisis was there. And then they had to be nationalized and being supported by capital support, for instance, and guarantees by governments. So this is a long agenda. It goes back many years that we have to raise the capital requirements for banks. And with a community of NGOs and many others, people, scientists and professors in the Netherlands, we work together in the so-called Sustainable Finance Lab. We promoted the idea that this should be the end of the neutrality of finance. Finance is never neutral. Money has always an impact. And if that's true, and we believe that as true for 40 years, then we should calibrate regulation to that. So, for instance, if we want to combat climate change and to limit temperature rise worldwide, and we can say if there is a bank in some country which holds large amounts of fossil assets, this bank will run a huge risk, not only for society and for the financial system, but also for itself. Because somewhere in the next decade, these assets will be worthless. And we shouldn't wait for a second crisis. So why don't we raise the capital requirements for those banks which have heavily lended money or have heavily invested in the fossil industry? And that was just a proposal we went after. And we got a lot of attention because supported by the world agenda of the SDGs, mainstream finance, mainstream politicians, the European Commission are trying to find a new connection. How can the financial industry contribute to societal goals? Wow, that was a step forward. We are not there yet. We didn't enter paradise, so to say, but we were able, together with a lot of friends and community we are part of in Brussels, just to alter the debate, to shape the debate and put concrete proposals on the table. That's how you should do it. And we got support from central bankers. I believe also the Spanish central bank is involved, the Dutch central bank, because they see the connection. Wow. So we are pushing others on the agenda of changing finance. That's one of example. I can give you some others, but I should keep my mouth shut for this moment, I guess.
That's good enough, I guess. And talking about community, the Global Alliance is a community. How would you say, Marcos, that you play a role in changing finance together with the 50-something banks that are part of the Global Alliance now? Is that different from what Triodos can do on itself?
Well, I think that what we do is basically a few things, and some of them are very much aligned with what you mentioned, Kees. When Kees was talking about the work that has been done, looking into the European Parliament discussion earlier this year on the sustainable finance legislation, etc., which Triodos has been like very much on that role, as well as other banks of the Alliance, la Banca, ética italiana, Crédit Coopératif, or GLS Bank in Germany. And what the Global Alliance has done, for instance, in this regard, has been the support with the global brand of the whole thing. So it's not just Triodos who speaks to the members of parliament in Europe saying, guys, you should consider that, but it's a whole community of banks all over the world with more than 60 million clients that is supporting this approach. So this strength of the size of a global movement, I feel it's very important for you guys in Triodos, but it's not only in Triodos. It is with our members in Peru, are discussing with the supervisor in Peru to try to go into a much more social orientation in the way in which the regulator looks at risk, etc., etc., etc. So that's one way. But we do plenty of other things. I will just mention 2 or 3. That's besides the one about the European Parliament. One of the ways we support our banks locally is by conducting independent research. So just let me give you a couple of examples, and I'm sure that everyone will understand. At this very moment, the GAVB has started, not by ourselves, obviously, but has started 2 very relevant researchers. One is along with Exeter University in the UK, and also partnering with the World Bank. This is going to be like a 2.5-year research, and it's going to be about how regulation in the world could embed the principles of values-based banking and reinvent itself into a regulation that is more focused on the social and environmental outcomes and not so much into the process. So it's an independent group, an independent, very prestigious university. We will present some provisional outcomes in a white paper in our annual meeting in Vancouver in February next year. And with the World Bank, the following year in 2020, the intention is to do a couple of pilots with 2 central banks that will try to do it. So that's where we push it. Another example, so that's pretty ambitious. We are also conducting a research with Harvard University on the materiality of the impact of social and environmental banks in the world, which wants to convince everyone that, guys, that's the way to do it. It's not just blah, blah, blah. That's the healthy way to do things. But then we do other things. The GABB developed, and has developed for a long time, what we call the values-based banking scorecard. We're bankers. I'm a professor of business administration, so I want to measure what we do. So the banks of the GABB follow 6 principles. I'm not going to go through that. You can find it in the website. And to know whether a bank, GABB Bank or any other bank, is aligned to those principles, we need to measure that. We need KPIs, ratios, facts and figures. Come on. So we developed that scorecard, and we use it internally for the time being to measure up to what extent any bank whatsoever, Triodos, of course, but many others, is aligned to those principles. Then there is a score. I mean, this bank is ranking, 84, this bank is rating 29. Well, we arrived to an agreement very recently with the Central Bank of Malaysia. It's huge. And I know for many of you, Malaysia is like very far away, it's a very remote country, but in terms of the banking industry, it's huge. It's an important hub for Islamic finance, and it's an important hub in the southeast of Asia for finance as a whole. And the Central Bank of Malaysia has adopted the Global Alliance scorecard to foster, first of all, Islamic banking into a values-based approach, and hopefully in the next 2-3 years, all the banking system in Malaysia. A third example, and I stop. This magazine that you all see now is Euromoney. This is probably amongst the 2-3 more prestigious magazines in the whole world for banking and finance. This issue that was issued last week, I think, around the meeting of the World Bank, the fall meeting in Bali, Indonesia. They really choose nice places, by the way. It's curious. So this is something that all bankers, the big bankers in the world and all regulators in the world will have in their hands, because it's the sort of official magazine for that meeting. The title of the magazine, the special cover, is "Banking's Doing Well Again." That's the title. And in those pages, you will find 67 pages about the role of the GABB as a pioneer in the world, trying to, contaminate positively other banks. You will find an incredible article about Triodos Bank with Peter Blom and other people featuring there, about Van City Credit Union, another of our members in Canada, and also about that Malaysian example. And we do plenty of other small things. So we are very active in many areas of it. But that's the 3 examples.
That's very good, and that tells a very nice story, but I'm wondering something that I'm sure it's on some of your minds as well. We're still a small community if we compare ourselves to the conventional banking and financial sector. How do you see that part of the financial sector? How do we take people by the hand? Do we go behind them, ahead of them? Do we go with them? How do we perceive the rest of the financial system? Because once you're on the ground and, with your sleeves up and you're in Brussels talking to the parliament, or you're, conveying your studies and trying to convince others to jump on board, how does it work? How do we see other banks?
Shall I? Sure. Well, that's a pretty good question. Not easy to answer, by the way. Thank you, Sandra. It's very kind of you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I travel all over the world, and I talk to many bankers and central bankers and politicians and the kind. So I've seen lots of different things. So I would sort of split the universe of bankers in three blocks. There are the banks that are really convinced that the way Triodos is banking, the Global Alliance banks are banking, is the right way. And even though perhaps their banks are not there yet, because it's not easy to transition to a values-based banking approach, but the top managers, the CEO, the chairmen, because they have learned about from the financial crisis, sometimes because of the pressure from society, they really believe that's the way to go. And there are quite a few bankers, and I'm very proud to see that, because it's those banks, perhaps they cannot be members of the Alliance today because they still are in transition, but they might be members in 3, 4, 5 years. So there's this piece. Then there is a second block. There's a second block of bankers who, they are fully in their old paradigm. They haven't learned from the crisis. Kees, you know that also. I mean, of course, they say a few nice words because, you know, it's reputation is key, but you really see that nothing has fundamentally changed in the banks. It's very difficult to approach them. Of course, you can have a conversation, but it's going to require more pressure from civil society, from you and many others, to help us move into that direction. And then there is a third block, which is the ones who are like starting to look at the kind of banking we do in a more hesitant way and thinking, wow, perhaps we should change, but they still haven't. We are really talking to those. We really want to push them. But I see those 3 blocks very clearly. Yeah.
Okay, that's very clear. And from a Triodos perspective, maybe, Kees?
Well, let me briefly add on what Marcos just said. I think what I like, I joined Triodos last year, as you mentioned, Sandra, and what I like is I find a community that more or less implicit follows 3 rules. First of all, work very hard. I like that. Because if you want to be a bank, you better do it in a very professional and skillful way. And I see many people doing really their best daily to contribute in a very professional way to Triodos. Second of all, be as idealistic as possible every day. Dream on. And keep on dreaming every day while you are practicing at the same time. And the third attitude I have experienced and I like very much is modesty. Because let's face it, we have a different approach. That's what drives our community, that's what connects us. But we should never make the mistake that we have the ultimate answer. I think we'll never have. And I think the third group that Marcos mentioned, I can testify from my Dutch experience, there are a lot of bankers. They are puzzling, they don't have the answer. So they are open to new ideas. And especially, and that's very hopeful, the new generation. There is a new generation coming into the banks. And for this generation, that's my experience in the last years, also before I joined Triodos, it's much more obvious to take a holistic perspective. And you're not just a banker or an investment guy or a portfolio woman. They more naturally include societal considerations in decision making. For them, it's nothing new to talk about sustainable development goals and what the financial industry could and should contribute to that. So maybe we should not put too much energy in the old man living in the old paradigm. We are very young, aren't we, Marcos?
Yeah, absolutely.
26 are you?
28.
28, okay.
Is it okay?
Yes, that's okay. Well, maybe we should focus on the new generation. Absolutely. I think, and the bankers, the professional ones, some also CEOs from big banks, trying to figure out, and sometimes older bankers, seriously, they start thinking about their heritage. They are starting to looking back. Okay, what's my track record? What was my contribution to society? And sometimes that opens a good conversation about, wow, in your last years in your professional career, you might help the younger generation to get position in the banks, and sometimes they do. So that's another practice of change. We try to stimulate and to be available for people for conversation. Mm-hmm. Just offering different thoughts on how the financial industry could and should work.
Yeah. So there you see really the connection between the individual mind, the individual heart, the individual will, the people and the system, right? Because you have individuals and relationships, and it's impressive how much you can achieve by relationships towards the change of the system. And talking about relationships, I have a question for Marcos, because it might be easy to talk for Triodos as our own institution, but when you have 50-something banks and bankers together, how do you bring them together and align them on a common vision that can be useful for the Global Alliance to do its job in terms of advocacy and bringing the change in the system?
I mean, as you can imagine, this is obviously challenging. It's 54 financial institutions, even if they are very much aligned with the 6 principles of values-based banking, and even if we really check very carefully before any of our banks join the alliance, we check a few things. It's a few things. Using the scorecard I mentioned earlier, we check whether there are KPIs, ratios, and everything, their policies, everything really fits into the 6 principles. So we really check that. But we check on other things. And one of the things we check, when this is going into the individual, right, is whether there is genuine appetite within the executive board, the supervisory board, the top guys, the top persons in the bank, the CEOs, whatever. Whether we want to really check whether from an individual perspective they really feel that that's the right thing to do things, and that they have appetite to contribute to the movement and to use their bank also as a role model along with the other 50 plus. So we check that pretty well. But in spite of that, we have banks in India, Korea, Japan, Nigeria. I was talking this morning to our Nigerian bank, but then earlier this week I was with the Latin American colleagues, and so it's so diverse in terms of cultures, languages, approaches to life, that it's like, it's not easy, but we do it. We really use something which is very, very important, and it's we take those 6 principles as a sort of a milestone, a pillar of what we do. And they are in the center of all the conversations. And every time we need to achieve any agreement, for instance, like a year and a half ago in Kathmandu, that we were meeting in our annual gathering, we arrived to an agreement is that we should launch what we call the Kathmandu Pledge. Mm-hmm. And by this Kathmandu Pledge, all 50 plus banks were committing to, a few things that you can all imagine because they're at the DNA of Triodos, who is one of the signers. Of course, there's always a bank that has a small concern because there are some banks that are more in the social arena, not so much in the environmental, while others are the other way around. But in the end, you just go back to the 6 principles and look at those guys in their eyes, say, guys, is it meaningful? And it normally works. So it's takes some time. But
so the principles are at the heart and you go back to them.
It's the principles and also the trust in the individual and the personal alignment. Those 2 things are key. Which is something that does not happen in other movements and other associations. It's a different thing.
Makes sense, yeah. I guess that's also our own experience in organizations and businesses when we have disagreement and how the purpose normally brings us together again. And Kees, what would you say? I mean, we're quite young in our venture in terms of advocacy and changing finance, but what have we learned as Triodos in this journey? What would you say have been either success factors or learnings or something relevant that you've lived yourself in this process?
Oh, wow, that's a very huge question. Well, let me mention 2 things. There's so much to do still. And you mentioned rightfully so in giving the big numbers of all the money that's available globally and is invested and loaned and whatever. We are a small bank, but we are a growing bank and we are a member of a growing community. And maybe 30, 40 years ago, mainstream finance was not paying any attention at all at the community we belong to. And nowadays, we are an interesting example for many. And my latest experience is in the Netherlands Michael was very right to mention that in his introductory speech as well. We didn't develop just a theory of change, it worked. For instance, look what's going on in the world of sustainable energy. Solar power, wind power, it's unimaginable that we can go through a transition of the energy system at low prices without remembering that decades ago, people from Triodos and stubborn entrepreneurs came together and just started a sustainable energy project. Although nobody had the idea that would be the future and everybody was stuck in the fossil paradigm, so to say. So nowadays we can celebrate that we made some progress. We have still a huge agenda in front of us, and we should never be satisfied. Let's stay modest. But there is a practice of change. We are part of that. It works. It does matter. We make together with all the entrepreneurs and projects and citizens. We put money of our clients into we make a difference. Wow, that's very inspiring. And that's what ultimately it's all about. The change we make together.
And the power of the small, right?
Yes. Yeah. Just start. Be stubborn. Don't listen to others. Just start. Do it. Wow.
That might be because I was going to ask you about, before we open the floor for questions and dialogue, I was going to ask you, each one of you, to give a final remark. If you would have to say something to the community that we have today with us, what would it be? What would you say?
I think I just try to give some final remarks. I gave the floor to Marcos.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, you mind if I switch into Catalan now?
No problem.
Okay. Okay, so I'll switch into Catalan with your permission. So
yeah,
I think that you need your...
No.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Yes, that's
okay.
Right.
So,
this is very important, Kees.
Yes, please.
It's okay.
Yes, I'm connected. Yeah.
Well, doncs, canviaré, doncs. Jo diria que la conversa ha estat prou evident, no? La intenció i el rol de Triodos des de la seva fundació, i he tingut una llarga història amb Triodos durant molts anys, té que veure amb utilitzar les finances d'una manera sostenible, positiva i com un agent de canvi social i mediambiental. Això és evident i ho sabeu tots. I la nostra aliança, evidentment, a nivell global i de manera agregada amb tots els bancs que en formen part, és precisament també agafar tota aquesta força de tots aquests bancs, agents de canvis a tot el món i posar el nostre gra de sorra perquè aquest canvi sigui més evident a qualsevol lloc del planeta, des del Japó, passant per Bolívia o Canadà. Però, per molt que faci Triodos o Bancosol a Bolívia, o Bank City a Vancouver, o Alternative Bank a Suïssa, no farem res si no és amb la col·laboració i el suport i l'empenta de la societat civil, dels clients, dels accionistes, dels membres dels bancs. Jo crec que som nosaltres, tots plegats, els que hem d'empènyer tota aquesta corrent, hem de pressionar també des de la societat civil, sent membres, sent clients d'aquests bancs, o els que siguin clients d'altres bancs, que em sembla fantàstic, preguntant a aquests bancs, escolta, què fas amb els nostres diners? Són els meus diners, jo els diposito a les teves caixes. Dipositar no vol dir que és un contracte mercantil de dipòsit. Dipositar vol dir també que diposito la meva confiança com a persona, com a ésser humà, en tu com a banquer. I, per tant, com a intercanvi d'aquesta confiança, m'agradaria que em diguessis a on inverteixes aquests diners. Per tant, nosaltres, des de Triodos, dels bancs de l'Aliança, des de la pròpia Aliança, estem apretant molt fort. Crec que estem aconseguint avanços claríssims, però ens queda molt, molt per guanyar, però no ho farem pas si no és amb la col·laboració de tots. Els dic una cosa, som 60 milions de clients en tot el món. Per als coworkers, empleats de Triodos, que sapigueu que no esteu sols. Teniu més de 60.000 companys treballant en bancs en valors per tot el món i és una comunitat creixent. Jo crec que necessitem la força de tots per canviar les finances. Gràcies.
Muchas gracias. Un aplauso para nuestros invitados.